So with users signed up and signed in, it's time to now map them to our messages. We do have a check to avoid that unauthenticated users are able to reach our post routes here. But remember, in our user model, we do have this messages array, so each user may have multiple messages. And each message has a user. So it's time to now fill this connection with some life. Right now, we don't have that connection in our database. So the first thing I'll do is I will clear all existing messages in my database by running db-messages remove and pass an empty JavaScript object. Because the existing messages, of course, don't have a user mapped to them. And from now on, I want to make sure that I only create messages where this mapping exists. So with the messages cleared, it's now time to go to the messages.js file in the routes folder and make sure we do create this connection whenever we create a new message here. So here where we save the message, it would be great if we could also save this message on our user and on the other hand, save the user who sent this request in this message. Well, to do so, we need to fetch the user who reached this route in the first place. Now we can do this since we, if you remember this, store our user in the payload of our token. And this token needs to be sent with each request in order to be able to create a new message. Therefore here we can retrieve our user from our token. So let's create a new variable and name it decoded. Here I want to use the JWT package to decode a token. Now a token is not one-way encrypted, we can decrypt it. This is important, otherwise we wouldn't have a chance of getting the data. But here is an important thing about the decode method I'm using here. This method is not checking if the token is valid. We do this up here with JWT verify. Here we pass the secret and see if the token is valid. With JW decode, I don't check the validity, I only decode the token. This is fine here because I already do check the validity before reaching this route. If you don't have this check before reaching this, don't use decode, always use verify. Remember, you get the decoded token there too. There's just no need to reuse verify here because again, I do check it before actually reaching this route. So here all I pass is the token, which is stored in a query parameter, and that gives me the decoded token. I can then find this user in my ID by using user find by ID here and pass the decoded object where I stored the user in the user field. Remember this here, it's stored in the user field. And then underscore ID. I then have a callback where I do either get an error or my user. Now, first, of course, as always, want to check if I do have an error. And if I don't have an error, I can now save my message. So we'll take all of the code down here and put that into my code here. So with that, I'm now creating a new message. When creating this message, I can now finally populate the second field, the user field. This will simply be the user I extracted from the database here. By extracting it from the database like this, I make it easy for Mongoose to automatically set up all the connections in the background for me. Now with that, the other step I want to do, of course, is when I save this message and I know it was saved successfully here, I also want to access my user, the messages array of that user. Remember, we do have this field which is an array. And here I want to push a new message on this array. Of course, the message I want to push is the result of this operation, so the message we just created. Of course, here we then need to call user save to save this updated user where we pushed the new message on the stack of messages. With this setup, I'm creating this connection on the back end. I'm adding the user to the message and the message to the array of messages on the user. With this, the connection is set up on the back end. Now for all of this to work, to be able to find a user by ID, you of course also need to import the user model here. So make sure to add this import here where we import user from models user. This is extremely important, otherwise this will not work. Now on the other routes, let's have a look. When patching, when editing a message, I don't need to update anything about this relation because, well, the message just changed, the user relation didn't change. It's a different thing here when I delete a message though. If I delete a message, I need to remove it from the stack or from the array of messages a user has. So this is something we should also take care when setting up this mapping, that we don't leave the message ID in the array of messages for a user if the message was already deleted. Now we could fetch the user here and delete this message from the array of messages, but Mongoose gives us another nice way of doing that. In the message model here, we can create some kind of Mongoose middleware. So a method which will get executed whenever something happens to a message. I can define this directly on the schema, and there I use the post method to say do it after a certain action happened. Then as the first argument in a string, I specify for which action I want to listen. It's the remove action here. I want to get active whenever a message was removed. This now will then execute this callback, which passes me the message which was removed, but it still has a reference to this message, even though we did delete it. This is the cool thing about it. So I know this message was deleted. Now with this, I can simply find a user by ID. Of course, I need to import the user from my models for this. So from this folder here, the user file. And then here I can simply pass message user. Since our message has a user field, and this user field actually only holds the ID of that user, we can pass this without an issue here. So here we then have a callback, where I either get an error or the user. And then here I could also check for an error, but I'll leave this out here. All I want to do here is I want to take my user, access its messages array, and then pull a message from this array. The message I do want to pull, of course, is the message I passed here to this callback of my post middleware. Thereafter, I save the user to reflect this update. And with that, I make sure that whenever a message is deleted, the messages array on the user who created this message is updated so that I don't have any redundant connections in my database. And by the way, this is why I cleared my database before, starting with that so that I don't have any old data sitting there. With these changes in place, let's restart our backend server to reflect this latest code. And now we can continue working on the front end to actually send the token with requests so that all of our valuable setup on the backend is now actually used.